give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
To curb corruption, one must be courageous to confront and rise up against the corrupt. Sleep well, be guided by ethics and standards for peace of mind. Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. LMD, the voice of business.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. Tonight on the forum, we're zooming in on the world of consulting. And with us, we have the Managing Director of Luminii Consulting, Lushani Kodituwakku. Hi, Lushani. It's very nice to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Ruwandi.
Lushani, if we start off our conversation by setting the stage a little bit, consultancy is something that's been around for years. How has this evolved over the years, and what exactly does consultancy look like today?
Absolutely. So consultancy, as you know, is getting expert advice from external consultants, so that people not in the company, usually when a company is looking to either grow, diversify, enter new markets, or do organizational change, making those key strategic decisions, instead of the management teams getting together, and obviously they have a lot of the knowledge and expertise in-house, but it's also getting an external party to come in and give that independent advice. They do a lot of research, both internally and externally, and really advise, add a lot of value to those decision-making, those strategic decisions a company needs to make. So bringing those sort of external consultants who have a plethora of knowledge, they have worked with many firms, many businesses. So not only do they bring knowledge from within the company, they bring that external knowledge across many companies. So advising management teams appropriately with whatever questions they have about their growth, about their internal organizational changes, etc. So that's essentially what consulting means. And it's essentially that sort of getting that independent external advice. And how has it evolved? It has evolved. I mean, I started doing consulting 24 years ago, and I can say it has definitely evolved in the last 24 years. I think to start with, it's one area there are two areas which I think I can say has definitely evolved. The first being it's the mindset. I mean, traditionally, I think, a long time ago, consulting was always, the bigger firms, bigger businesses would bring external consultants to address their key questions. But today, I think more and more companies look to consultants. There is a real shift in the mindset of CEOs, the management teams. They do value consultants who bring in that external knowledge and insights. So there is a real shift in the mindset of the management teams, and more acceptance of bringing in consultants to address, questions that they have internally, and they want to really test their decisions as well. And the second area is, I think traditionally it was always called management consulting or strategy consulting. Now under that big overarching banner, you can clearly see there are various other sort of, sub-consulting areas that have evolved. So just to give you some example, there's IT consulting, ESG consulting, ops consulting, HR consultancies. marketing consultancies, brand consultancies, and within the strategy consulting arm as well, something that we have developed over the years is commercial due diligence. So not just advising the management teams, but also investors or management teams looking to invest. So that's another very key area that has evolved. And, IT consulting, take an example, there's various other streams that have evolved, like cybersecurity or digital transformation. So that's how consulting has evolved.
It's all about independent external advice. Like you said, Lushani, we're seeing companies around the world increasingly seeking business consultancy services. So do you think that this demand is adequately met, or do we have too many or too few consultancy firms and individual consultants?
There are, it's quite a fragmented market. I would say the demand, it depends on where you're looking at. But I mean, at the moment, there are, three, sort of, you could almost put it into three baskets in terms of the supply. So there's the big three, the McKinseys, BCGs, the Bains of the world. And then you have the big four practices also who have branched out into providing consultancy services. And then very importantly, what we have seen over the years, and this is something else that has evolved, is the boutique consultancies. And they are taking quite a leading role in the world of consulting. So these are specialist boutique consultancies focusing on very key areas of consulting, and they are becoming specialist consultants in a way. And more of our clients, certainly that's what I'm seeing in the UK or US, they are now looking to actually go into these boutique specialist consultants for advice. So it's I would say that the demand is adequately met. There are many companies, as well as some, freelance, individual, independent consultants getting into this market as well.
Let's talk a little bit about boutique specialist consultants and, of course, the key areas of consultancy. What services, or I would say, what areas of consultancy do companies demand the most? Looking at it, from a global market perspective, and what would you say are the hot trending areas and why?
Good question. Traditionally, strategy consulting is always needed because, management teams, that's sort of the core area. They need advice in terms of formulating their strategic direction. Apart from that, the hot areas within that sort of larger banner, I would say tech consulting is quite hot. ESG consulting is becoming very strong. We certainly, from a commercial DD perspective, have done a lot of commercial due diligence on tech consulting firms or ESG consulting firms. So they're rapidly growing in the market. Within tech consulting, I would say the hot areas are like cybersecurity or data and insights. That's another consulting area. Digital transformation is quite hot at the moment as well. Anything is sort of around that sort of space is quite popular these days.
Most businesses turn to consultants when they want to future-proof themselves in several areas, various areas, for example, ESG. So do you think that businesses are ready to future-proof themselves with the help of external independent advice, like you mentioned earlier?
Most businesses should be really thinking about future-proofing themselves. I mean, when I started, I think this is quite something that, CEOs are more and more thinking versus, take 20 years ago. They don't want to just depend on the internal organization and just making those decisions internally. And it is so difficult to get all the expertise in-house. So they are looking towards external consultancies, like you mentioned, for example, mainly because it's driven by regulation or something like ESG, very much driven by regulatory needs. And so to adhere to those regulatory needs, they need to reach out to external consultants to inform them, to prepare them, to future-proof themselves. In terms of sort of taking a whole business as a whole, it's really what every CEO should be looking at is, if there's any questions, anything that keeps them awake at night, then that should be a sort of an alert to tell them, this is an area that they do need to get that external help to future-proof themselves. It can be changing market dynamics, companies where they're based, and how the markets, the market dynamics are. Is the company prepared to address those market dynamics? In terms of competition, are they, competitively based in that market? What are their customers saying? Are the customers likely to continue to buy from them going forward? Also, internal organization, do they have the management teams, the talent that they need to grow the company, the internal capabilities? From a cybersecurity perspective, how have they sort of future-proofed themselves? And also, very importantly, the sustainability of the business model. Is it an appropriate business model for the market that they operate in? So these are sort of questions that CEOs, management teams should be constantly asking themselves. And then, looking for that external advice and future-proofing themselves, like you very correctly asked.
It's time to take a very short break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about consulting.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Lite 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Lite 87.
Welcome back to the show. Tonight, we're talking with the Managing Director of Luminii Consulting, Lushani Kodituwakku. Lushani, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question now. You have worked with so many clients over the years, and from your experience, what is the most essential ingredient in a client-consultant kind of relationship?
I'm glad you asked me that question, because something that this is very close to my heart. I have actually worked with over 500 businesses, I think, over the years. And I would say the most essential ingredient is there are two ingredients, and very easily answered is trust and collaboration. So client and consultant, you need to build that trust between the two parties very earlier on in the stage. Even if you start a consulting project, that trust needs to be built, because the entire sort of project or the work will always depend on the trust that's built. So how quickly that trust is built, how much information internally the client can share with the consultant, and then also how much they trust the consultant, as well as how much the consultant trusts the client to share that information. And when they give that information, again, trust plays a massive role in actually getting that advice and implementing the advice. And then I mentioned the other word, collaboration. This is very close to my heart. When I set up Luminii Consulting, this was actually built because I felt there was a real gap in the market where consultants would just go in, do a job, and then leave. But one of my ethos has been to very collaboratively work with the clients, and this is I think the bedrock of any success for a consulting firm, for a consultant. to build the trust and work collaboratively. End of the day, that collaboration is what's going to achieve success and a win-win for both parties, both the client and the consultant.
You mentioned collaboration and trust. These are, of course, values that are not only relevant for consultancy client relationships, but in general for businesses. So when it comes to core business values like integrity, trust, collaboration, excellence, how are businesses coping today globally? And what does the picture look like in Sri Lanka?
Sure, that's that's a good question. Tough one, but a good one. I think we have to adhere to these values because we world in a very interconnected world. I mean, especially because of internet, technology, social media, we are very interconnected. So, maintaining integrity, the reputation, this is, I think, very core for any business anywhere in the world. And these are the businesses that are able to maintain sort of these core values, such as integrity, trust, collaboration. They are the ones who would survive going forward. And this is also something I should mention is this is not just the leadership, it should be across the entire organization. I think employee engagement is very important. So it's not just, within a few number of people, it's the entire organization as a whole that needs to maintain these core values. And I think CSR, corporate social responsibility, has also played a huge role in promoting this. But then again, there needs to be that genuine commitment to maintain it. And you asked me about Sri Lanka. I think as Sri Lankans, we have these core values within us. I certainly, when I established here, something that I very kept close to my heart are my very core values that I brought from Sri Lanka and embedding them in my business and my firm in the UK. So I think, I can say Sri Lankans have a lot of very good core values. It's just a matter of bringing them, being proud of it, and implementing it and seeing it through within their business organization.
Talking of Sri Lankan organizations, what is your advice to local businesses when it comes to working with consultants and consultancy companies? Because I think for Sri Lankan organizations, the need for independent external advice has never been greater.
So I think there are a couple of things that they should bear in mind when they are bringing in an external consultant or a consultancy firm. The first is to select the right firm. This is really important. Very often companies or businesses are driven to sort of go with the known names. They will just, go with one name that they know well. You need to do your research. You need to speak to a couple of consultancies, identify who has the right credentials for the job. This is really important. Credentials go a long way because it's the expertise you're buying, and that expertise needs to be backed by the credentials of the company. Another element is what I alluded to earlier was around, who are the consultants, the consultancy firm that you can easily work with. That collaboration is really important because this is a relationship. This is a two-way relationship and it needs to work. There's no point in going with the most well-known firm and find that it's really difficult to work with them. So as a result, you must look for the consultancy firm, speak to them, speak to the people who are going to do the job, the people who are going to lead the engagement, really test and see whether you can work with them for that longer period of time, whether you trust them enough to take their advice. So selecting the right firm is the first step in that process. Once you've done that, it's really important to give a clear brief. there's nothing more important than having that clear scope of work so that there's no misunderstanding. You don't come to the end of the work engagement and come up with sort of, this is what we wanted, but this is not what we got. So having that very clear scope of work, giving a clear brief to the consultant so they can build the scope of work on it. And also importantly, discussing the methodology, what sort of asking those questions like, in order to address these questions, what sort of a methodology, what sort of research, what do you need from us? What are you going to conduct independently in terms of research? So asking those key questions very early on in the stage of the engagement is really, really key. And then once the project or the engagement starts, collaborating, trusting them, sharing as much information as possible, because don't forget, at the end of the day, the more information you can share about the company, consultants have the ability of then, testing it, really looking at the external markets, looking at the internal organization, and providing the best value in the engagement. Also, something else is to have regular catch-ups. This is something that's something I always insist on with each of our engagements. Have regular catch-ups, because these regular catch-ups can really tweak the process and where the engagement's going. Discuss the findings, and come up with different questions, test the findings. So this is really important to have those regular catch-ups. And then once the engagement's done, get a proper presentation, a proper discussion, usually follow it up with a good strategy workshop where you can ask questions and really clarify, because a lot of the time there will be lots of information in the consultant's mind that's not probably gone into the report, but they will be able to tell you a bit more about what they really feel and want to say. So it's really important to have that sort of follow-up strategy workshop and address all of those questions and speak to the consultants person to person. And something very quickly is don't be afraid to repeat the work after a few years. I have a recent client. We did a really nice strategy project a couple of years ago for them. And the CEO is extra, very switched on. And what's really nice is, a couple of years later, they came back and said, now we want to test the same questions, but we understand that it's a different market. It's a post-pandemic market. And we want to do the same exercise, but in a bigger scale. Since we've done the work, they have, exponentially grown the business as well. So now they wanted to repeat the same exercise. So, don't forget to keep doing what works. So those would be my little points for someone looking to bring in consultants.
Lushani, my next and final question to you revolves around LMD's own campaign, Refresh Sri Lanka, which we launched last year to encourage a mindset change to create a more civic-minded nation. How should consultants and consultancy companies ensure that civic-mindedness is not ignored when they're advising companies on areas such as growth and strategy, for instance?
Extremely good question. But before I answer that question, I must congratulate you and extremely happy and proud to learn that LMD is doing this program, the campaign called Refresh Sri Lanka. Something very close to my heart, especially also, like you said, as a consultant. I think civic-minded, we all must build a civic-minded society. This is something I'm quite passionate about. So I'm really happy to hear about LMD's campaign around Refresh Sri Lanka. Addressing your question, what should consultants do to maintain it? I think we have a huge responsibility as consultants to ensure that we do build a civic-minded society. In the olden days, especially I would remember consultants were always well known for just thinking about the profit and focusing very much around the P&L. But the consultant's role and mindset has also changed over the years. And definitely most consultants now, and I think we all as consultants have a responsibility to not just look at just the strategic growth or the profit or the P&L, but also to think when we do advise, think about the impact it has on society and the local community. So I think it is in the consultants, that should be in the back of their mind when they make those, when they give that advice. So very rightly, I think, consultants have a responsibility to bear that in mind with all the advice that they give. I think to a large extent, we have done that at Luminii Consulting with every project, every engagement. We do bear it in mind. We think of the impact it will have on the organization and the local community. And something else as consulting companies that we've had to also start thinking is the younger generation, the people who join consultancy firms in or any business for that matter. The younger generation want to work for employers who are thinking about CSR, about ESG, etc. So this has now, become almost like a must-have, a must-think, and so it doesn't stop with the consultants, but very importantly, I think as advisors, we need to always keep that in mind when we give advice.
We've been talking with the Managing Director of Luminii Consulting, Lushani Kodituwakku. Lushani, it was lovely having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.